Do you like red flowers? Want to learn about one that is native but very landscape friendly? Then watch this video. Say hello to a native flower commonly known as fire pink. This is one of the best landscaping flowers you may not have known existed. It's a well-behaved native that produces some of the deepest shades of red that you will encounter. And I'm going to give you a complete profile on this flower, including what is fire pink and its benefits, the identification and characteristics, growing conditions, growing from seed, save seed, wildlife associations and landscaping, and then we will review. So I hope you stick around and learn about this incredibly beautiful flower. So what is fire pink? Fire pink is a herbaceous perennial flower native to North America. Scientifically known as Silene virginica, it will grow 6 to 24 inches tall in part sun and well-draining soil. Blooming for roughly 6 weeks in the spring, its beautiful deep red flowers are great for attracting hummingbirds. Now, for a native range, this one has a pretty wide one. It goes from south central Oklahoma up to Wisconsin, then east to southern Ontario, Pennsylvania, and the Carolinas. But you're most often going to find this in the southern Appalachian Mountains, the Ozarks, and the Ohio River Valley. Benefits. So fire pink has several benefits. First, its blooms are absolutely gorgeous. They put on an incredibly deep shade of red that it rivals the cardinal flower or red bee balm. But these plants don't spread aggressively and they live longer. They generally live for at least 5 years. Second, it's relatively easy to grow, and it's not very fussy. Most references state that it needs medium to dry conditions and part sun. However, I have grown it in areas that would technically be considered full sun, getting at least 6 hours of sunlight per day. But it seems to be fairly tough too, as I've transplanted and relocated them in early spring, which goes directly against many references, but the plants seem fine. And third, this plant can and will attract hummingbirds, which not many flowers do well. And I have had them visit, as you can see here. It isn't as good as attracting them as red bee balm or cardinal flower, but it does pretty good. Now, I wouldn't say this plant has any cons, per se, but there are a couple of what I'll call disappointments. Really, there's just two. First, it's listed as not being long-lived. Now, normally this can mean that a plant may only live 5 years, and my plants are right around that mark. However, as of this movie, they still look perfectly fine. Second, while it does attract hummingbirds, it really doesn't seem to attract too much else. I really have filmed my plants for a long time, and I do see occasional pollinators besides hummingbirds, but in general this plant is more of just a pretty face. It doesn't really seem to do much for bees, and that's likely due to its deep red color. The bees just can't see it. Identification. So the height of fire pink is generally on the shorter side, anywhere from 6 inches to 2 feet tall, generally staying upright. The stems are round, green, and will have lots of small white hairs. There'll be several flowers at the top, usually around 5 to 10 per stalk. It'll have basal leaves at the base of the plant, as well as along the stalk. They're oblong to lanceolate in shape and up to 6 inches long, with the lower leaves being much larger than the leaves on the stalk. Now, unlike the stems, the leaves won't have any hairs once they're fully grown. Also, the basal leaves are usually present most of the year. These are some of my plants in January, and at the time of this footage, we've had many nights approaching single digits in Fahrenheit, and the leaves are still there. Flowers are a bit smaller compared to other plants. They're about 1 inch diameter and long. They have 5 dark red petals that are usually perpendicular to the axis of the flower, like noticeably so. And each petal will have a pair of pointy lobes at the end. Behind the flower is a tubular calyx that is green and covered in small white hairs, and then there'll actually be 5 petals coming out of the calyx as well, which looks really cool. Now, the stems and area behind the flowers are covered in a sticky substance. Sometimes insects can get caught on this, which is a feature that is the inspiration for another common name of this plant, scarlet catchfly. And as some of you native plant enthusiasts are probably noting, that there is another member of the Silene genus, which looks almost the same, just a taller version of this plant, called royal catchfly, Silene regia, which also has sticky stems. Before I go on to growing conditions, I just want to point out that I have an article with all this information I'm showing here, plus more, at our website. I'll link to it down below. When it comes to growing conditions, fire pink is fond of dry to medium moist conditions that drain well. For sunlight, most references clearly state partial sun only. Not full shade, not full sun, just part sun. I can say that if you want to talk strict definitions, I have grown them in full sun, which is at least 6 hours per day. but perhaps I should expand on that a bit. So I first planted it in an area that received a few hours of morning sun and then about 5 hours of late afternoon sun. And this was near my spice bush, but that was before that plant was very large, so they were fairly exposed. Although this would be considered full sun as the technical definition goes, as it's more than 6 hours, it certainly wouldn't be the sun at the hottest part of the day. After a couple of years in that location, and once my redbud tree grew a little bit larger, I decided to move them. So I placed them just to the east of my redbud tree, which in the summer means they're going to get full sun from dawn until early afternoon. So that's right around 6 to maybe 8 hours a day in the, around the solstice, but definitely not the hottest part of the day. They're getting afternoon shade. I've never really seen a plant very stressed in these locations, although I would add water during times of extreme drought. Now, in the wild, fire pink is found in part shade areas that drain well or are dry. And that makes me really wonder that if it only grows in those types of locations, because in those areas with more sun or moisture, perhaps taller natives outcompete fire pink. That phenomenon happens with other plants like spotted bee balm or aromatic aster. They like dry conditions because they just get smothered out and starved of sunlight by taller flowers in more moist areas or more sunny areas. How to save seed. So after blooming, the flower will form a capsule that'll hold some seed. Collect the pods once they start turning brown in July or August, and just snip them off and place them in a brown paper bag, placing them upright so that the seed doesn't dump out. Leave this bag in a cool, dry location for a week or so everything's fully dry, and then you can just pop the seed capsules to release the seed. The seeds from this are small, round, and hard. You can store them in a sealed container or in an envelope in a cool, dark place for a couple years. How to grow it from seed. Seed from fire pink will have a dormancy mechanism that we have to overcome with cold, moist stratification for about 60 days in order to get them to germinate. You can do this by either cold stratifying in the fridge in a moist paper towel or by winter sowing. Personally, winter sowing is going to be the easiest way to do this. I'll put links to both methods down below in the notes. But for planting, whether it's stratified seed or winter sowing, just fill a suitable container with moist potting soil. Then press the seeds into the soil and cover with a very light dusting and place the container in a location that will get morning sun and afternoon shade. If winter sowing, the seeds should germinate by mid-spring. For reference, this footage is from late April in zone 6-7 border. Keep them in pots until you get about 2 to 3 sets of true leaves. Then you can either separate the seedlings or transplant them to their final location. These are pretty deer and rabbit resistant, but I have found that it's always good practice to spray young seedlings with liquid fence, at least until they are somewhat established, as even deer resistant plants get browsed when the foliage is tender and young. I'll put a link to liquid fence down below. Wildlife associations. So look, I'm obviously a big fan of natives, and a big part of that is because of the wildlife they attract. Well, as I stated earlier, this flower really doesn't attract that much, at least during the day. And I'm just being honest with you. It will attract hummingbirds and you will get them. I have managed to capture some on camera, as you can see, but this plant really isn't native to my specific location, so that I can understand that perhaps I won't see as many just because it isn't naturally here. However, if you live in the southern Appalachians or North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee, or the Ozarks, or in the Ohio River Valley, where this flower is plentiful, then you may have a lot better luck than I do. All that being said, outside of hummingbirds, I have seen limited pollinator action. Now, the other main type of pollinator is nocturnal moths, so I'm not out there at night, so I just don't see them. As far as hosting goes, it is listed as hosting at least one species of moth, which, it's not that much, but it's still not zero. Landscaping. Okay, so this is where this plant can thrive. Many people, particularly those who are visual gardeners, love to plant low-growing, well-behaved plants that look great year-round, and fire pink fits that bill. Provided you give it a bit of afternoon shade, the flowers are really attractive, and they do seem to fill a visual void of mid to late spring, which, I define as after the spring ephemerals, but before the longer blooming perennials like echinacea, heliopsis, or mountain mints. If you can't plant it where it is shaded in the afternoon by shrubs or trees, it could still work if shaded by taller grasses like bluestem or even taller perennial sunflowers. And I really do often wonder if this would be perfectly fine totally exposed, in a mulched garden where there's not competition. Still though, make sure you just pay attention to your plant and provide it water in times of drought, especially if it's exposed to hot sunlight. Okay, time to review. Fire pink is an extremely attractive native flower that has a long bloom period in mid to late spring. Its deep red colors contrast nicely with lush greens of spring, and it's a fairly adaptable and robust plant. Plan on saving seed periodically, provided you want to keep it perpetually, as it is listed as being short-lived perennial in most of the references. Although I've had my plants for 5 years, and, well, they seem to be fine. Although it doesn't attract as many pollinators during the day like other natives like penstemon, it still has its place in hosting at least one moth species and definitely feeding hummingbirds. And really, considering how many exotic geraniums are sold each year, it begs the question as to why we don't see this native more commonly used. I mean, this is a question that might be best left to Reddit or Facebook, but this plant, visually at least, for when it is blooming, could definitely replace geraniums in terms of beauty and provide some ecological benefit. But that's all I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video and got something valuable out of it. Take care now.